have a multifaceted question.
Of course.
I was expecting that.
And so I'll just throw out, you said you were a 1994 graduate from law school, Stanford Law?
I was. Harvard Law School.
Harvard Law, I'm sorry. We're approximately the same age. I graduated from law school the same year. So I would offer this. You threw out some statistics earlier that said 1 in 10 black men, I forget what
in their 20s and early 30s.
Right, will spend time in prison or jail.
Actually,
now.
Yep.
And 1 in 4 will spend some time in prison and jail. I think we can both accept the fact that black men face a multitude of negative issues and influences in society, particularly American society today, whether it's the portrayal of us as promiscuous or violent, other people's projections of their own hang-ups on us in that, when it comes to that, you know, pictures of our athletes on the cover of magazines, you know, carrying a basketball and a white woman in one arm don't help. And so I would ask you this.
I remember that one.
Yeah. I would ask you this. Well, let me offer this. A woman cannot raise a boy to be a man. She can raise him, but she cannot raise him to be a man without a male influence in that boy's life. And a black woman, or any woman, sure as hell cannot raise a black boy to be a black man. If we are ever going to reverse the 1 in 10 or 1 in 4 statistic, suggesting or offering that black women find someone else to raise our black boys certainly won't do any good in reversing that trend. Because that's not a dynamic. If a black woman can't raise a black boy to be a black man, I know a white man certainly can't.
I was with you until that last statement.
Okay.
So I actually would say, I mean, I think that, to put it bluntly, I think white men can raise black boys to be men.
And black men?
To be black men?
Black, well, they're going to be black. They're going to be black, right? You've heard that. There's only a few things I have to do in life, right?
Yeah, right.
And I don't know to pay the IRS is on the list either.
No, it's not. It's not.
Right. So
yeah.
no. I think that people. I mean, I think that's the part of the project of the book is actually to have you know, people rethink that. I mean, I think having 2 parents is better than 1. I think that is true. Having 2 parents and 3 children, I couldn't do it alone. It'd be a whole different ballgame, right? So 2 parents are better than 1. But could you have, you know, black woman and a Latino guy who have a child and the guy's a good father to the child? Yes. And they have a good relationship and they work well together and they're not fighting and at odds. Could that person be a good father to the child? Yes. And that child, frankly, may think of themselves as an African American. That child in this new world we're entering may think of themselves as Afro-Latino. That child may think of themselves as multiracial. That child may think of themselves in a lot of ways that would be bizarre, certainly to my parents, right, who were from Georgia and Alabama, and you know, they lived under the 1-drop rule. So,
yeah, but what we're talking about,
things are different.
How that child perceives themselves is only is only part of that child's experience.
Right.
The introduction to my question was premised on the notion that how society views that child will largely shape that child's experience.
Right.
And society won't view that child as Afro-Latino or Afro-Asian.
Right.
That child is black.
Right. Well, let me tell you, so I've actually done research on this issue, which some of this is not, most of this is not in the book. But in a prior years, I actually wrote about white parents adopting black children. And a lot of the same issues arise there when white parents adopt black children. And the truth of the matter is that when white parents adopt black children, they do fine. If those parents love those children and they care for them and they pour their hearts into them as parents do, those children do fine. Those children are not harmed by having a parent of a different race. And I know people might disagree with that, but to the extent we have data, that's what the data show. They do fine.
And the last part of my question is, and of those, how many of those children grow up to be contributing, inclusive, positive images in the Black community?
Oh, now you got me there, yeah. So it actually is the case that Black children who are raised by white parents are more likely, last I checked this research, are more likely to think of themselves as, in some, as a, yeah, something, right? They're more likely to say, I'm a member of the human race. They're more likely to say, they're more likely not to define themselves primarily in terms of their racial identity. That's true. And then that raises the question of whether that's a good thing or not, right? And this is one of the big issues with the idea of Black women, even dating or marrying men who aren't Black. There's this fear of, what if I have children who don't identify with being Black? What if I have some light-skinned kids who try to actually pass for white, right? Or they become multiracial or biracial and they don't have a Black identity. What if they don't have the identity that I had? And that's a real fear, and that can happen. But that fear is actually not that different from what happens, or what they worry about. It's not that different from what happens all the time. So I was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. My parents grew up in the South, in Georgia and Alabama, under the most brutal form of Jim Crow. And our experience in Cleveland, Ohio was a world apart from my parents' experience. A world apart. They could not understand what we were living through in Cleveland, Ohio, given what they had lived through in the Jim Crow South. And now my children are raised in California, which again is a world apart from Cleveland, Ohio. And that's just what happens with children, right? The parents want to, I think it's natural for parents to want to continue themselves or sort of see themselves in their children. But there's some ways in which your children are not going to just carry on who you are, because they're going to make choices that are a response to the world they're living in, and the world they're living in is not the world that you grew up in. And as a parent, one had better accept that, because there's just no choice there, right? So it's true for all Black children, whoever they're raised by. Those Black children will have identities that were different from my identity growing up in a school with practically all Black kids and all Black teachers where we sang the Negro National Anthem. My kids don't do that. And even if they know the song, the Negro National Anthem, this is James Weldon Johnson, lift your voice and sing, for those out there, right? The Negro National Anthem will never mean to my children what it meant to me.
Would they stand
right?
up? Would they?
Well, it's funny. I went to a concert in San Francisco. This is the change in context, right? I never went to hear jazz music with my father, right, as it turned out. But I took my son to hear Charles Lloyd, who was one of my favorites. And Charles Lloyd said, well, we're going to play this song. And I stood up. And my son said, was that the song you had to stand up for in school? I told him, yeah, it was, right? But he didn't know anything about it. It was just some song we're hearing at the Herbst Theater in San Francisco. But it's not something they do in their school, because their school is not mostly Black, frankly. But it was something we did in Cleveland. And in my father and mother's upbringing, they had a whole different set of traditions, right? Because they were in Georgia and Alabama. And there were reasons they left Georgia and Alabama, right? And so they left a lot of that behind, and we had to embrace something new. And now my children are embracing something new because that's what they know. And I can tell them stories of the past, but to them, my stories about Cleveland are the same as my father's stories about Jim Crow. Yeah. And you can share it or hear it, but you can never really inhabit it. And so I think that's just what happens with children generally. And so this idea that Black children won't have the same racial identities as their parents, that's true. And that's true even if the parents are Black. As hard as it is for parents to hear that. So. And the one thing I'll just tell you, for my parents, if everyone here knows, so Barack Obama's president, right? Think about what it means to have children who are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 when that happens. That's just the way life is. A black man got elected president.
For them, it's not big.
They don't understand why all these black people are crying. You know, they don't get that. They don't get that. And there's actually no way they can really feel that in the way that we would have felt that, right? Or my parents would have felt that. Because for them, it's just, well, yeah, Barack Obama's president. And that's a good thing, right? I mean, we don't want them to actually have the experiences that we had.